Hello, INFPs. Okay, at long last, we're at my favorite type. Thank you so much for your patience. I know, as we get through these series, it's like, INFP next, INFP next. I save the types that get the most views for the end, because as I go through these series, they always get more thorough, and I get, more insights and things I want to share. So I want to make sure that the types that get the most views have the most, thorough videos, but it does mean that you have to wait the longest. So I'm so glad to be on this type. Like I've said, I think in all my INFP videos, INFPs are my favorite type. These are the kindred spirits. They speak to my FI. I really love INFPs. So in this video, I want to get into this matrix here, this overused, underused strength weakness matrix. So I want to talk about for the INFP, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and which cognitive functions can they really leverage to really get the full zest out of life and enjoy life more. So if you don't know what a cognitive function is, that's going to be really important for this video. So Myers Briggs actually came after what Carl Jung coined in 1921, which are cognitive functions. So these are the 8 cognitive functions here. This is by no means exhaustive, but I do have deep dives into all these cognitive functions. If you're interested in those, I will have that playlist linked in the description. But this can be a good starting point, even though it's not exhaustive. Maybe a certain function calls out to you, and this is a good way to type yourself using the cognitive functions, because a lot of the online tests are very frequently unreliable. I know some people who it worked for, some people who it didn't work for, so they're really unreliable, and I wouldn't get too attached to whatever result you got in an online test. So all 16 of the personalities use all 8 cognitive functions in a specific order and specific ways, which gives a specific flavor to the personality type. So for the INFP, this is the order in which they use their cognitive function. So I have the 8 listed here, as well as their abbreviations on the side. So loosely speaking, this is descending in order of importance for the INFP. Which ones do they value the most, to which ones do they value the least? And also, loosely speaking, this is descending in chronological order that they get developed within the personality type. So that first function's been with you your whole life. As a child, you see evidence of that function. The second function becomes more prominent and more of a priority, maybe teens, 20s. The third one more of a priority, your 30s. Your fourth one more of a priority, your 40s, and so on down the line, loosely speaking. So to add some nuance to this, your top 4 functions are the ones that you're conscious of, you're aware of yourself using them, and you also value them in yourself and others. Your bottom 4 functions, you don't tend to value them in yourself and others, and you're also not conscious of when you as an individual are using them as a default. To add more nuance to this, the functions in green, 1, 2, 5, and 6 are your potential strengths, and the functions in red, 3, 4, 7, and 8 are your probable weaknesses. Now, I said the words potential and probable because this is not 100% of the time, and as you get older and older, it's more likely that you've got a better use of some of these functions, but still, as a default, there's kind of always going to be a tendency for these weaknesses to be there. So back to the matrix that I talked about at the beginning of the video, these top 4 functions is where that matrix live, this overused strength, underused weakness. So because these top 4 functions are both conscious and valued, there's so much meat to unpack here. So I'm really going to spend this video deep diving into these top 4 functions and describing, what can you leverage, which weaknesses can you hone, or which strengths can you really tap into. So if you're interested in where I got some of this information, these bullet points are quotes that I got from Carl Jung, John Beebe, and Myers Briggs about what they say about the function placement. What does the first function do? What does the second function do? And I have a video where I went a deep dive into that, and then I summarized it in these bullet points. So I'm not going to go into it deeply here because of that other video, but if you want to pause it and see where did I get some of these quotes, why is the second function secondary importance, why is the third function immature, you can look at those here. So your first cognitive function is introverted feeling, or abbreviated FI. So the word introvert means to turn inward, because intro means inward and vert means to turn, so to turn inward. So Carl Jung actually coined the words introvert and extrovert, and he got those words from Binet, who used the words introspection and externospection. And the only difference there is that spect. Inspect means to watch over. So introspection is to watch over what's happening inwardly, or to watch over what's happening outwardly. So when you're introverting, you're turning inward and watching what's happening inwardly. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with alone time or time with people, even though colloquially that's kind of what it's come to mean. But it's just turning inward and reflecting. Now, it's definitely easier to do that. It's easier to introspect when you're alone. But still, you could be in a group of 40 people and you tune them out and you tune in and introspect in that moment. In the same way, you could be alone, like maybe you're watching Netflix, but you're not meaningfully introspecting or turning inward. If you're at home alone and you're watching Netflix, you're still turning outward and watching what's happening outwardly. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with being around people or not being around people, although it could be easier in those contexts. So introverted means to turn inward, and when you turn inward, there's a lot of things you could be watching inwardly. You could be watching your thoughts. You could be listening to your body and in tune with your body. And in this case with introverted feeling, what you're tuned into and introspecting about are your feelings, your values, your morals, your convictions, your emotions. How do you feel about things, kind of in your emotional gut? And this is your overused strength. Everyone's function is their overused strength. So this is the function that's been with you your entire life. As a young child, you should see evidence of yourself using this function. It's the water you swim in. It's what you feel compelled to do. Like even if you tried to stop using your dominant function, it just keeps happening. As well as it seeps out into every area of your life. You'll be using this function, introverted feeling, at work and at home and in recreation. And in all spheres of life, your dominant function kind of seeps out. And Carl Jung talks about that this is the thing that's life-giving. Your dominant function is the thing that you love to do. It gives you life, it gives you energy, it gives you joy. So this is really who you feel like you are. A lot of times when people describe themselves, they spend a lot of time talking about that dominant function. So I did a series where I went into Carl Jung's writing, Vanderhoof's writing, and Myers Briggs writing, and I looked at what words show up over and over and over again. And I will have those linked in the description box, that cognitive functions playlist. But the number one word used for introverted feeling was moral, which I have in that first bullet point, and also misunderstood, which I have in that second point. So there's a lot of quotes with introverted feeling about wanting this inner harmony with the self and having this inner certainty of ideals and these inner convictions. So it's a very internal function. Extroverted feeling, in contrast, is a function that wants kind of this external harmony. And introverted feeling wants this internal harmony with the self, being in alignment with its ideals, its values, its convictions. The second word for introverted feeling was misunderstood. And a lot of times it's because the still waters run deep. It's under the surface. It's not seen externally. This is not an effusive, emotive function. This is something where, a lot of times the facial expressions are relatively minimal with an introverted feeler. But there's an inner intensity of the individual, deep depths of feeling, sensitive to this brutal world. And these feelings are all under the surface and still waters run deep. So there's a very complex emotional landscape. There's a lot of pixels, here. It's kind of like everyone has emotions. It's part of the human experience and everyone's got values and convictions. But introverted feelers are meditating on that and in a very high resolution way. For other types, maybe their relationship with their ideals and their values is kind of low resolution, low pixels. But this is incredibly high definition, very nuanced into the subtle differences of feeling and really analyzing that a lot. There are quotes about introverted feeling being holy or having this spiritual experience or seeking fault in the self. There's almost like a spiritual religious undertone to introverted feeling, that there are these values and convictions and it feels like maybe these have been given from a higher power and wanting to be completely in alignment. The extroverted judging functions, extroverted thinking, and extroverted feeling are willing to kind of skim over what we're doing wrong as a society for the sake of constructing something. The introverted judging functions, introverted feeling and introverted thinking, really are looking at where are we falling short from the standard of perfection? Where are we falling short from the ideal and needing everything to be perfectly in alignment? It's not willing to cut corners. It's really seeking after the standard of perfection. There's a lot of quotes in introverted feeling about being artistic, poetical forms, music, and biographies. And it talks about that art is the only way that these feelings can even be approximately understood. These feelings, they're so deep, they're so complex that you can never fully grasp them and never fully comprehend them. But when you use art, you're getting closer and closer to being able to understand it. There's a lot of quotes about introverted feeling being individualistic, independent, renouncing tradition. I've got these pictures in the bottom, kind of these hippie pictures, or this guy doing yoga, this girl with these feathers in her hair. A lot of times I will compare introverted feeling to a hippie because it's very non-traditional. It renounces tradition. And as well as hippies really have this emphasis with love and justice, which there were quotes in the introverted feeling section about, this emphasis on justice and love and, hippies being anti-war and introverted feeling as well being, sensitive to the brutality of the world. So there's a very hippie-like quality with introverted feeling. There are quotes about introverted feeling with these negative emotions, kind of this discouragement, this melancholy nature, but it talks about then it will oscillate to this idealistic side, this very passionate side, the delight of introverted feeling with these new eyes. So it's kind of this oscillation between these positive emotions and these negative emotions. There are brief glimpses where the introverted feeler sees, wow, my ideals are being met. There is a community that actually is meeting my ideals. This does exist. And then it will oscillate to, we're falling short again. So, there's a lot of idealism. There's a lot of hope within this function that I think a lot of people don't know about introverted feeling. This childlike idealism. A lot of times introverted feeling will get the bad rap for that melancholic nature and how we're not, how we're falling short of the ideal. But what creates that is this idealism first. The idealism created that. Externally, introverted feeling looks kind of inconspicuous, delightful. They have no desire to change others. So in a room, like an introverted feeler, they're kind of easy to get along with. They're not necessarily focused, proactively on getting a good vibe up and external harmony and hugging people and smiling. You know, they're not against that type of thing. A lot of times they're more of an inconspicuous, you know, they're relatively delightful, but they're not trying to necessarily change the atmosphere or change others. You know, they're really seeking kind of an authentic environment. Like, I'll take care of my identity and my feelings, you take care of your identity and your feelings, and then, you know, when we all take responsibility for ourselves, we can all get along. So that desire to not really impact the emotional environment isn't from a selfishness, it's just from a self-responsibility. I have the responsibility of my emotions, you have the responsibility of your emotions. So I've got these images here that I thought could represent introverted feeling. You know, we've got this hugging the world. You know, I think introverted feelers can sometimes get that, you know, the tree hugger stereotype. We've got this acoustic guitar. It's a very authentic instrument, a very natural instrument. There are quotes about introverted feeling, this connection to the earth, very natural. And the spiritual journey, the individual feels like they're on a spiritual journey, an artistic journey. You know, there's poems here. There were many quotes about poetry in particular. So introverted feeling is a very complex function, and it's a function that I admire very highly. So a lot of times if people are feeling down or not really like themselves, they haven't given their dominant function a space to thrive, because that's who you really are. So Carl Jung talks about that introversion, when you turn inward, that gives you access to yourself and reflection. You can deeply know yourself. You can introspect. So it's not just watching Netflix, but going inward and deeply processing these feelings. And then you have an extroverted function, which Carl Jung says gives you access to the world and action taking. So a lot of people define extroversion as being around a bunch of people, which that is part of the world, but it's only a subset of the world. So extroversion is really tuned out to the world in general, not just people. And so this gives you access to action taking. So extrovert means to turn outward, you know, watch what's happening outwardly. And in this case, it's the intuitions. And intuitions are the opposite of sensing. So sensing is what you have experienced or you are experiencing with your senses in reality, in existence. These are things that exist or have existed that you've watched. So the opposite of that are things that do not exist. These are things that are not in reality. These are things that you have not experienced with your five senses. So this could be ideas. This could be the future. That's something that hasn't existed in reality with the senses yet. This could be possibilities, your imagination. So it's wanting to take these intuitions, these things that don't exist yet, and put them in the external environment. Bring these dreams to life. Bring the imagination to reality in the external world. So everyone's second function is their underused strength. This is the function that can be kind of watered down. It can be neglected. A lot of times it can be confined to one area of life. Like maybe you use your extroverted intuition in creativity, but you don't use it at work, or you don't use it with your friends, or you don't use it in sports, or, you know, it's kind of confined to one area of life. Or sometimes, like in the case of an INFP, they might use this function, but they kind of twist it and do it in a very introverted way. So it might be, okay, I'll try this new idea and I'll explore these possibilities in the safety of my own home. I will kind of not go out into the world and explore, but I'll try a new art form at my house, you know, in a very introverted way. So it's not getting the full extent of this function. So Carl Jung talks about the second function adds complexity to the type. You know, initially you're just that introverted feeling function, and it gives you one dimension. And then once you get into your teens, and as your personality is starting to be a little more solidified by the time you're like 16 or so, the second function is starting to come on the scene and be more of a priority. And this adds complexity to the type. It adds more dimensions to the type. And Carl Jung says this function is of secondary importance. And if you look at those quotes from the slide that I told you to pause at the beginning before the first function, this adds range and prospect. This function adds satisfaction. I have never spoken with anyone who regretted getting into the second function. I've spoken with a lot of people who are kind of, you know, wary of getting into it. They're kind of not sure about it. But once they do get into it, I have never, not once, heard any negative results about getting into this function, because this is who you really are. You're an INFP. So to get rid of the N function really gets rid of a huge part of who you are. So the number one word used with extroverted intuition is possibilities, and it's usually in the plural form. It's not just one possibility, but it's possibilities. You know, it's this excitement for all these different options. So there are quotes about encompassing the fullest possibilities, or fresh possibilities, or seeking fresh possibilities, or new possibilities, or searching for possibilities, or discovering possibilities, or the imagination and all of the possibilities within the imagination. So something I think about with extroverted intuition is like Disney or anime. When you think about all the different movies and all the different possibilities that they went, these were things that were not in existence, and now we have these cartoons that just, they existed in the mind first, and now they've been brought to reality in many different ways. And the frame with extroverted intuition is it's expectant. It's expectant about the future and these possibilities. It's seen as promising, and it's eager to go after these things. So it's a very optimistic frame. Sometimes if people have an intuitive function in the third or fourth spot, they're very wary of the future or nervous about the future. But this function up in the front, it's very expectant, and it sees these new possibilities as promising. Extroverted intuition loves novelty. It's very changeable. It loves change. It loves the new thing. And a lot of times their life is characterized by the initiation of lots of new enterprises, or their life is the accumulation of projects. And extroverted intuition has this everlasting search for change because, I'll skip down a few bullet points. The stable conditions are seen as suffocating. And so it's this change or this new thing which lets the individual out of the mundane to do this new thing. Extroverted intuition is the enthusiasm, animated, full of the joy of life. This is an incredibly optimistic function. It's almost like a childlike, radiant function. And there are quotes with extroverted intuition that it's very clever. It's very active in mind. Extroverted sensing is very active in body, and extroverted intuition is very active in mind. And it talked about that extroverted intuitives, they can solve problems very quickly, in areas that other people have had a hard time getting on. So what other people feel like is a big difficulty, extroverted intuition can just run with it. And this is a quote from Carl Jung. He applies himself to callings where he can expand his abilities in many directions. I hear from INFPs a lot that they consider themselves to be multi-passionate. A lot of times, like with a YouTube channel, for example, the advice might be, niche down, do one thing, hone that one thing for a long time. And a lot of times that advice is coming from types that is the best advice for them. But for the INFP or any of the NPs, I think honing themselves in too much is really getting into SI, and it's really putting bounds on them. Whereas this function really expands themselves. If you're multi-passionate and you want to do a YouTube channel, for example, expand yourself in all sorts of directions. I think that's great advice for an introverted feeler. So I recommend that everyone work on their second function for like 5 years, because this is who you really feel like you are. It's something that you have a natural talent for, but you have to develop the skill in. And it's a function where you can mentor other people. A lot of times your first function, you're just such a natural at, so you don't really understand what's so hard about this function, or why is this tripping people up? You just kind of don't know what the hurdles are. Your second function, you have to earn the skill in that function. So you understand, oh, this is difficult about it, so the way you deal with that is this. Or I used to think this was the way to do extroverted intuition, but now I think this. And then you can teach people that thing. You can teach people how to be creative. You can mentor people in that way and impact people in that way. So John Beebe calls this second function the parent, and the third function the child, which I'll get to. And when you think about what a good parent does, it's mature, it sets expectations for itself, it does its responsibilities, it sets expectations for the child. And so it is your responsibility to get into this very childlike function. It sounds kind of counterintuitive because extroverted intuition, it's very childlike and has this optimism. It is your responsibility to get into this optimistic state, this enthusiastic, radiant state. I've heard about a lot of I've talked to a few INFPs that they talk about that when they were younger, they felt like if I just stew on the problems of the world and I feel them deeply, then that will motivate me to make a change in the world. But they said, no, if I want to actually make a change in the world, me sitting here and being melancholic and just being very sad about the world is not what's moving the needle. And they talked about that actually when they got into this full joy of life, it didn't mean that they stopped taking the brutality of the world seriously. They still take the brutality of the world seriously, but now they're actually making a change. I love the Brene Brown quote, figure out what lights you up and then do more of that thing, because that's what the world needs, more people who are lit up. So if you want to make a valuable change in the world, it's your responsibility to get into this extroverted intuition, to see the expectant possibilities, the promising possibilities, do the change, do something new, and that's really where you can really impact the world. So now getting into your third function, introverted sensing, or abbreviated SI. So everyone's third function is the direct opposite of your second function. So your second function is extroverted, this one's introverted. Since your second one is intuition, this one is sensing. So introverted sensing is your third function. And since your second function was your underused strength, this function is your overused weakness. It's your opposite in that way as well. So these functions are called a polarity, the relationship between them. It's like the North Pole and the South Pole. NE is the North Pole, SI is the South Pole. They're poles with each other, they're opposites. Or you could think of like a light switch. The light switch is either flipped on to NE or it's flipped down to SI, but you can't be at both at the same time. The light switch, if you try to flip the light switch on and off at the same time, you put it in the middle or whatever, it's not a meaningful result. You're not getting the depth of either of the functions. So the thing with that is it's kind of a forced choose. So for every second you choose to be an SI, you're choosing not to be an NE, which is an issue because that's who you really are. You're an INFP, not an ISFP. And Carl Jung says that your second function is of secondary importance. And once you start getting down here, this function in particular cannot be expected to offer deep wisdom. This function John Beebe calls the child, and I think of it like as a bratty teenager. It's immature, it's cowardly, it thinks it's better than it is. It's kind of like a teenager where they're not all bad. Teenagers are not even close to all bad. And they're especially good like in a time of recreation, for example, but they're not good to be calling the shots. So SI needs to subordinate itself to the parent, NE, and NE needs to call the shots for SI, not the other way around. So there's a lot of immaturity here. A lot of times people will go to their third function maybe in an argument, when they're feeling defensive, when they're feeling insecure, they're just feeling kind of down or not like themselves. So there's a tendency to get in what's called a loop, which is where you're in your first function and your third function too much at the expense of your second and fourth functions. The reason people tend to do that is because you're an introvert, and this is an introverted function, so there's kind of an indulgence there. There's a comfortable space. But Carl Jung talks about there's dangers of this one-sidedness, being too introverted or too extroverted. If you get too introverted, focusing on yourself too much, it's very self-focused, and you stop having things to even process. It becomes kind of like navel gazing. It's an excessive amount of, self-indulgence. If you're too extroverted, then there's too much, you're like losing yourself to the world. You don't know yourself. There's a lot of action taking, but maybe it wasn't fully thought through. So Carl Jung talks about you need both access to the self and reflection and the world and action taking. So every second you choose to be an SI, you're losing your access to the world and action taking, which is extroverted intuition. So a lot of times in the third position, you take a lot of the positive traits of a function, it gets kind of twisted to be negative, or you really take on a lot of the negative traits of a function. So introverted means to turn inward, once again, and in this case it's turning inward to what you have sensed. And a lot of times, what you've sensed is what you have experienced with your five senses. It's what you've experienced that has existed. So when you turn inward to what you've experienced sensorily, that could be your body, turning in internally and processing. Am I too hot? Am I too cold? Does something need to adjust it? Are these shoes kind of uncomfortable? So Carl Jung talks about they have like finely attuned sense organs, just very tuned into that thing. Everyone has sensory organs, but some people just aren't paying attention to that type of thing. The other way that you could turn inward to your senses is turning inward to what you've experienced and processing those things. So what that means is like combing back through your memories, as an example, kind of combing back through and what you have experienced and seeing the passing of things, like the long-standing, like all of humanity. What's timeless for all of humanity. So the most common words used with introverted sensing were archaic and reserved. And for types that have introverted sensing up higher, they have a much better relationship with the past and, doing things of a timeless nature. But for introverted sensing third, it just has this archaic reality. And Carl Jung talks about they can be estranged from reality, and they have poor comparative judgment, like from past to present. And so a lot of times what I notice with SI thirds is this can be, maybe they broke up with someone and they really idealize that past relationship. And it's not a realistic judgment comparing past to present. Or it might be like undervaluing it, but it's just like an improper calibration with how the past actually was compared to the future or compared to the present. A word used over and over and over again with introverted sensing, over and over again, very repeatedly, is the word passivity or passive. They take the enthusiastic and they dampen it. Like when you think about extroverted intuition, it's very excitable, very enthusiastic. It's actively creating new projects. So the opposite of that is passive. It's kind of everything's dampened. Let's not get too excited. Let's not get too excited. Let's bring it within the necessary bounds. And so that's probably the number one issue with introverted sensing third is this passivity. When I see an INFP or an INTP that are feeling kind of down, a lot of this passivity, sitting in this, and a lot of these pictures here I chose were very passive pictures. Sitting there with your cat, not doing anything new, not doing anything creative, but just very passive stance toward life. There are quotes about introverted sensing will acquiesce in isolation. There's a lot of quotes in introverted sensing about being timid, caution, having a protective shield. Extroverted intuition, the opposite of this, kind of throwing caution to the wind. It's excited about the possibilities. Whereas introverted sensing is very timid and caution, and it's overly so in this case, in the introverted sensing. Got to get more into extroverted intuition and try the new things out there in the world. Not in an introverted way, but actually out there in the world. Introverted sensing is comfort seeking. It can be banal, doing things in the same old way. So I've got this guy in the bottom left, just on his computer, doing the routine job, very banal, very boring, doing things in the same old way. And for, introverted sensing dominance, that would be like getting in the groove, and, they really are reaping the rewards for this thing, because that's what they are really in tune to. But for an INFP, it's that extroverted intuition. that really is the best. Introverted sensing has these beliefs I cannot change. There's a lot of themes about predestination within introverted sensing, and it has a passive resistance to anything new. And I noticed that with INPs, this passive resistance to things. They don't take an active stance, like a very bossy stance normally toward things that they don't want to do, but very passive, almost like kind of non-committal. The good thing about introverted sensing is it commits to something and does things for a long time. So if introverted sensing is going to help you in that way, if it's going to help you take your projects to completion that originated in NE, they're these creative projects, these new enterprises, if it's going to subordinate itself to NE and help you follow that thing through to fruition, then it's a great function. However, if it's going to stop you from ever starting things, the resistance to the new thing, then it becomes a problem. Introverted sensing, it feels very bound up. It feels very confined. It keeps things within the necessary bounds. I don't want to try anything too new. I don't want to try anything too crazy. I don't want to try anything too non-traditional. Let's just keep it within the bounds, not too enthusiastic. Let's dampen it. And it adds this banal flavor. Extroverted intuition has these exciting, creative ideas, and this just really makes it smaller, confines the space. Introverted sensing has a flair for every dangerous and gloomy possibility. So whereas extroverted intuition is really oriented toward what's the best that can happen, this could happen, this could happen. Projects are seen as a bud of future promise. And introverted sensing is like, that bad thing can happen. If I do it, that bad thing can happen. If I do it, that bad thing can happen. So use your extroverted intuition to brainstorm all the good things that can happen, as opposed to using the introverted sensing, which is very optimistic about the past. In this case, overly optimistic about the past, but it's very negative and pessimistic toward the future. Whereas extroverted intuition is excitedly creating the future. For introverted sensors, their mental life is formed by early experience. This is a quote that, the past experiences really form the individual and how their mental life goes. So I've talked to some INPs who maybe their childhood was kind of rough, and instead of using introverted sensing to process that thing so that they can go and have a brighter future, they get kind of stuck in that, it was a very hard time of life, or they went through a difficult time. They just kind of stay stuck and sitting in that thing and just kind of numb out. Introverted sensors, there's a quote that they have a difficulty understanding their own potential and understanding their own worth. When you think of potential, that's an intuitive thing. It's the future. It doesn't exist. So the opposite of that would mean you maybe have a hard time understanding, like, what's the potential of a thing, what's the worth of the thing. Introverted sensing is pretty practical, but it would be unfortunate for INFPs to not understand just how special they are, or what their worth is, or their creative potential. INFPs have so much creative potential. You've got that introverted feeling, which is this artistic, poetical forms, music or biographies, where they can take this deep feeling and they can start to approximately express it externally. And then you have extroverted intuition, which is incredibly creative with these new possibilities, and they're both non-traditional. And you get this incredibly individualistic individual that can really move the needle for humanity, with art, creating pieces that move people. And so it would be just such a shame for introverted sensing to hold the INFP back, for them to not understand all of their potential. So I've been saying this in all the videos, and I think people's third function is what makes them involuntarily single. So like if you're single but you don't want to be, because I think individuals want to be a mature person and they want to find a mature person. But maturity does not live in this third function. A lot of times people will want to be respected in their third function. They push and they push and they push, kind of like a bratty teenager would push, come on, respect me, respect me. And it's just not going to happen. What would make someone respect a teenager more is the humility. It's the pride that made people, and the pushing that made people not respect it. But people just automatically respect your second function. That's where all of the maturity lives. And it gives you an appropriate balance of access to yourself and reflection, and to the world and action taking. For some people, if you're too one-sided, it creates kind of issues in both directions. So that's where the maturity lives. And the third function, it says that it cannot be expected to offer deep wisdom. So allow the second function to parent this child function. So instead of an idea originating with SI, like in the past we did this, allow it to be the other way around. Start with extroverted intuition, like we could try this, and use introverted sensing to continue it to completion and get in the groove and continue it in the same way that works. So, it's important to have the second function delegate things to the third function, as opposed to the third function having these ideas about the way things should be and kind of delegating to the other functions. Really, it's a difference between like stability and comfort and change and what's uncomfortable. Any change is going to be uncomfortable, but extroverted intuition is so good at chasing that thing and really adept at the problem solving that might be required. I got this picture at the bottom right of this person just kind of couch potato, eating chips, watching TV. And that can be, introverted sensing. It's just this bodily comfort, this passivity to life, but you want to take an active stance in the world. So now getting into your fourth function, extraverted thinking. So everyone's fourth function is the direct opposite of their first function. Since your first function is introverted, this one's extroverted. Since your first one is feeling, this one is thinking. So extroverted thinking is your fourth function. And just like the second and third functions, these are in polarity with one another. So FI is the North Pole, TE is the South Pole, and you can't be in them both at the same time. You got to pick. Or it's like a light switch. It's either flipped on to FI or flipped down to TE. So because introverted feeling is your overused strength, it's who you feel like you are, it's the water you swim in, it basically never stagnates. That light switch is almost always flipped up to FI and almost never flipped down to TE. Like, maybe 95% of the time you're in FI, 5% of the time you're in TE. So that makes extroverted thinking your underused weakness. So your third function is a weakness because you might use it too much. You overindulge in that introversion. Your fourth function is a weakness because you don't use it enough. Because all the types have a different prison that they create for themselves by saying my first function and my first function only will get me what my first function wants. And that creates a different type of prison. It could be meditating on my morals, and meditating on my morals only will make me the most moral person. Or thinking about what I want and only thinking about what I want will get me what I want. But actually it takes some sprinkling in of TE to have some action. If you want this career, like if you want to do this creative thing, just thinking about it, if you sit back to yourself, okay, I don't know exactly what it is, but if I think about it a little longer, then I'll write the book eventually, because something will click and I'll get it. But TE says, no, let's chunk it out. Let's figure out what benchmarks, when do we want to have it done? Let's make some goals and actually get it done. And it actually lets you out of that prison, because just thinking about your morals doesn't actually make you a moral person. You actually have to put those into action. Moral actions are what make you a moral person, not just these moral meditations. So your fourth function is what John Beebe calls the inferiority complex. So it is a weakness, but it's not as bad as we think it is. It really is an inferiority complex. So sprinkling it in, it's vulnerable, but it's really not as bad as we think it's going to be. So extrovert means to turn outward. And there's a lot of things you could watch outwardly, the feelings, the sensory things. But in this case, it's watching the thought environment, the logical environment. So a lot of times these are resources that we might share, like time or money. And a lot of times it's about logistics, organizing a group of people externally in a logical way, which a lot of times is logistics. So the number one word used with extroverted thinking is systems. So thought systems, elaborating thought systems. So a lot of times these are creating different types of systems. So a task management system, a time management system, a money management system, any type of resource management system. And it sees people as resources as well. So leadership, delegation, organizing people in this way. So it's very world-oriented externally, and it can be a lot about resource management. So because you're an introverted feeler, like if you think back to that first image, that hippie image, that is just the direct opposite of this image here. All these suits in this boardroom, FI wants to kind of like stick it to the man, and TE just kind of is the man in some cases. So this image probably feels like the exact opposite of who an INFP is. You're looking at this image like, what is all this stuff here? I hate this type of thing. So if you have too much FI, there are quotes about it can have these moods. And because of these moods, their activity will suffer due to discouragement. So if you sprinkle in a little TE, it'll help with that. So there are quotes about TE being tough, TE being good with perseverance, persistence, and progress. So you don't have to become a TE Dom, or you don't have to use these 50-50, like 50% of the time FI, 50% of the time TE. But if you get to like 80-20, it'll really help you because, FI has these values. Like maybe you want to be an artist, or you want to be a musician, or you want to write a book. But it's going to take some of these TE skills, this toughness, this perseverance, persistence, and progress to make it happen. Too much FI can feel helpless, like its goals are impossible. It has these strong ideals, but it just feels like, it's never going to happen. I just don't know how to make it happen. But TE puts a lot of systematic effort into things. It's very outcome focused, results focused. There are quotes about TE will stake a goal and then it puts systematic effort into achieving it on schedule. So if I want this done in a year, that means in October I need to be here. It means in July I need to be here, and kind of chunking its way backwards. Carl Jung says that extroverted thinking is thinking which attains visible form. So that would be the result or the outcome. It's not enough just to think about something, but it needs to have results. And TE knows it's succeeded when it has the results. So for an INFP, getting into like setting career aspirations, that's something that I think would be really good for an INFP. and committing to it, committing to persevering. There's different kinds of difficult. There's the FI difficult where it's like, oh, I've been wanting to write this book for several years and I just haven't been doing it and I'm feeling down about that and I don't know that I'm ever going to make it and I just don't feel like it's going to be unique enough. Whereas TE says, I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to fail fast. I'm going to, I'll write a book. It's going to be kind of boring. It's going to be hard. It might be kind of a slog. But at the end of the day, I will know that I'm meeting my ideals. I will know that I'm becoming the type of person who actually follows through on my dreams. And it's both hard. One's hard work and it's kind of a slog. The other one's hard because it just feels like mind-numbingly depressing. And every year that you choose not to write the book or not to be the musician, you have to continue to do these jobs that are just not in alignment. And I think that that is the most soul-crushing thing to an INFP. For introverted feeling, the quote is that feeling can never be fully comprehended. So a lot of times it can serve as an excuse, like when I fully understand what the book will be about, then I'll get into it. But, time is ticking by and, it's been like 10 years about thinking about this book. And the excuse was, I don't feel quite right about it. I need to get it. But the feeling will never fully be comprehended. So sprinkling in TE gets you into action quickly. And it commits efficiently. Sometimes FI has some commitment issues. It's like, I don't know if it fully aligns with my values because it has the standard of perfection. And TE says done is better than perfect. It's not going to align with the values, but this thing that's out in the world that actually exists that maybe 85% aligns with your values, it's not perfect, but 85% aligns with your values is better than the thing that's not in existence, 0%. If it's not in existence, that's 0% in alignment with your values. So you might as well make the thing and have it not be that good. That you might be kind of sensitive about how it's perceived, but at least it exists. And you can know in yourself that you did what you set out to do, that you did the thing that mattered. Both TE and FI have a lot of quotes about morality. The difference between the FI quotes and the TE quotes is that the TE quotes are about moral optimization. So it's about bringing into alignment. FI wants this inner harmony, but TE says, we have our actions have to align with our values. We got to talk the talk. So we can't just, think about our morals, which FI will really help you with that kind of piecing through what is the nuance of our values. But TE says, let's bring that into alignment. Let's bring that into action. Let's bring that into moral optimization. Because I don't want to just talk the talk. I want to actually walk the walk. I want to put my money where my mouth is. If there's a cause I really care about, I don't want to just think about it a bunch. Maybe I want to donate to that cause or I want to volunteer in that organization. TE is very, organization based, maybe becoming like the leader in some organization, you volunteer, something like that. So TE is something that can add a lot of complexity to the INFP. So a lot of times with the fourth function, what I see with people is it'll be absent for a long time and it'll spike and then it goes back to being absent. So that's called a grip, that spike. It's when, maybe for a couple days or for a week, it's usually short-lived. It's where it's happening to you. You didn't consciously bring up that TE. It's just you didn't have control over it and it just happened to you. And so a lot of times this can happen, when you're really feeling down. This can be, not caring about time management, not caring about money management or things like that. And then all of a sudden, this tight grip on the finances and money and time management and maybe bossing people around in your household. And this is the way it needs to get done. And we have this timetable we need to get done by then. And all of a sudden there's kind of this, grip on everyone around you. And then it goes back to being completely absent like it had been. So as opposed to this oscillation between this absence and then spike, just raise that level a little bit when you have control over it so that it's not going to scream at you and have this big spike. So, work on a little bit more, time management, resource management, goal chunking, set a goal for yourself. We're getting around to the new year. Set a goal for yourself and chunk it back. Where do I need to be at this point? Where do I need to be at this point? I just finished my goal planner for the year. So if you're interested in that, that's going to come out Saturday. So I'm so excited about that. But seriously, it's all about making your dreams come true. I had the INFP in mind when I was making this. If I was going to make it for one person, I was thinking about INFPs when I was making it. So, taking your dream and actually making it actionable and chunking it down to manageable steps that aren't too much. So I've read that you don't really know someone until you know their fourth function. Maybe when you're an acquaintance with someone, you meet their first or second function, then you meet their third function over time, but you're not really friends with someone. Like, you don't really know someone until they introduce you to that fourth function. A lot of times people, it's kind of vulnerable to go to that fourth function. So you've crossed a new threshold of friendship when people show you their fourth function. So I'm always so grateful when INFPs show me that. And, who knows, they They have an iCalendar. They have a time management system. You know, it's not usually very robust, but they have it. Or, you know, they have this certain system where they do laundry on this day or they do this on this day. You know, they have kind of the system that they go through. Or when they boss me around a little bit, you know, it takes a while. You know, you don't know somebody until, you don't know an INFP until they start bossing you around a little bit. It doesn't show up very often, but it happens sometimes. I think the fourth function kind of whispers at the life purpose. It's not your full life purpose, but it whispers at it. I think for a lot of INFPs, they don't want to admit it to themselves, but that TE is whispering these strong career aspirations to them. It's connected with FI. It's usually like you want to be an artist as a career or a musician as a career or a writer or something like that, but it's whispering at that, and it's a valuable piece of you. And that nudge is not going to go away. You know, if you've wanted to do this thing for 5 years, you've wanted to do it for 10 years, that's not going to go away in 20 years. That's something that's going to be there. And so if you think about, you know, 20 years from now, if I do the thing, if I really go after my dream, if I really persevere and commit to that slog, will I be happier if I do it 20 years from now or if I don't do it? And a lot of times when you follow your current trajectory, you know, 1 year out from now, it's not that different. 5 years out from now, 10 years out from now, 20 years out from now, and all of a sudden that worst case scenario that seemed really bad for following your dream, when you follow that worst case scenario out of not following your dream, all of a sudden that starts to be like, wow, that's mind-numbingly depressing. Like if I feel like I'm depressed now in this current job I'm in, it's going to be worse 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And instead of following out what's the worst case scenario of both of these things, use extroverted intuition. What's the best that can happen? What's promising about this possibility? How can I be expectant about this possibility? You know, how can I try lots of different things? You know, to be multi-passionate and have the persistence, the grit, you know, and TE will give you some of that to really see it through. Because we need more people who are lit up. We need more people to kind of show the way with art, to kind of, you know, to create culture in that way. You know, if you don't like the way that culture is going, art is on the forefront of that and creating the culture. Extroverted intuition is on the forefront of these expectant possibilities. I follow a lot of INFPs and they talk about all sorts of random stuff. And I love to just, you know, come along for the ride with that type of thing, because the thread that runs through the whole thing is their values and the enjoyment of it. And you know, it carries me through the full thing. You know, I've watched a lot of INFP YouTubers, and they bring me in to these topics that I, you know, wasn't interested in. You know, they expanded my horizons with that extroverted intuition. So I love INFPs. I think that they're incredibly special. You know, like I said, they're like my favorite type. And of all the types, I think that they get kind of a bad rap in the MBTI community. And I want them to realize their full potential and realize their full worth and understand that what they do is valuable. And, you know, I just want to admonish INFPs to go after it, to do the thing, to don't give up, to persevere, to persist, because, I'm going to cry actually, because I'm just so touched by the INFPs in my life. And so just for all the INFPs that I've seen that have kind of given up, you know, it's so hard for me to watch that. So this is from my experience with those INFPs and from the ones who actually went out there and did it. I'm just like, I admonish you to go and do the thing. I'd love to see it. If you end up creating something, I would love if you wanted to link it in the comments or something. I would truly, you know, love to, you know, purchase whatever you make, or, you know, I would love to just support you in that way, because I think the INFP's creations are so valuable. So if you would like more INFP content, I will have my INFP playlist linked in the description box. It's got all the videos I've ever done about INFPs, and it also has the deep dives into these cognitive functions, as well as if you want to work on some TE. Like I said, I've got my planner. It's going to come out on Saturday, so stay tuned for that. It'll be on my website. It's down right now, but it's alexiskingsley.com. It'll be up on Saturday. So yeah, I love INFPs. Keep doing what you're doing. It matters. It makes a difference. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.